Her ex mocked her for being a housewife. Now he begs for a job at her million-dollar firm. The wedding was held at a luxurious country estate, with every detail meticulously curated to match the image he had built for himself, a rising entrepreneur with a promising future. There was a string quartet, crystal centerpieces, and champagne that flowed endlessly. Yet, somewhere between the speeches and the toasts, Amelia stood quietly at his side, smiling through the unease that had begun to settle deep within her. She loved Ryan, truly. But looking around at the crowd, composed mostly of his business partners, investors, and polished acquaintances, she couldn't ignore how out of place she felt in that moment. The same woman who had once dreamed of becoming an architect now stood in a designer dress she hadn't picked herself, celebrated more for her looks than her dreams. Ryan had convinced her that their marriage would be a partnership. He promised to support her decision, whatever it was. But the moment they returned from their honeymoon, that promise began to unravel. "It's better if you stay home for now," he had said, his tone gentle but firm. "We don't need the money, and honestly, it just makes sense. You'll be happier." At first, Amelia believed him. She figured there was no harm in taking a short break to focus on the home they were building together. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into years. Her resume gathered dust while Ryan's business thrived. And little by little, the dreams she once held began to fade into the background. Amelia adjusted to her new role with the grace expected of her. She filled her days organizing their home, preparing meals, and caring for their son, Noah, who was born a year into their marriage. Every laugh, every milestone, every late-night lullaby became part of the life she quietly built. She told herself she was lucky. Many women would have loved to trade places. But beneath the daily routines and school runs, a small voice inside her kept asking, "What about your dreams?" Ryan never asked about her day unless it had something to do with the house or Noah. Conversations that once sparked with curiosity about her ideas and ambitions were now reduced to casual updates on laundry or grocery bills. Still, Amelia pressed on. She believed in the value of family, in supporting her husband, and raising a child with love. She reminded herself that sacrifice was part of any partnership. But Ryan's perception of that partnership seemed to drift further each day. At social events, he introduced her as "my wife who keeps everything running at home," often with a patronizing chuckle. "She's got the easiest job in the world," he would say while his colleagues laughed, clinking glasses. Amelia smiled politely every time, but the comments stung deeper than she let on. Over time, his respect for her work at home vanished completely, and so did any acknowledgement of the person she used to be. The shift in Ryan's behavior wasn't sudden, it was like a slow erosion. At first, he'd make offhand comments, small jabs wrapped in sarcasm. "You've been home all day, what could you possibly be so tired from?" Then, he stopped saying thank you altogether. Amelia began to feel invisible in her own house. When she tried to bring up the idea of returning to work part-time, Ryan dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "Don't be ridiculous," he scoffed. "Who's going to take care of Noah? Besides, you've been out of the game for too long. It's not like you're going to design the next skyscraper." The words lodged themselves in her chest. She hadn't even asked for that much, just a chance to reclaim a part of herself. Things worsened as Ryan's business climbed new heights. With each milestone he celebrated, his ego swelled and his patience thinned. One evening, during a dinner party he hosted for some investors, Amelia offered a quiet opinion on a decor detail that didn't match the rest of the room. Ryan laughed, looked around, and said, "Well, it's not like my wife would know, she's not exactly an expert in anything anymore." Laughter filled the room while Amelia sat there, the heat rising to her face. No one defended her. No one even seemed to notice. That night, she cried in the guest bathroom, the sound of clinking wine glasses and artificial laughter seeping in through the door. It wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was humiliation. The ridicule continued, more frequently and more publicly. At client dinners, he'd tell stories of Amelia's silly attempts at art school in her 20s, turning her past into punchlines. She once spent 3 months designing a bookshelf and then forgot to measure the ceiling height. Imagine that, he joked once, as Amelia sat in silence. She hadn't forgotten. She remembered how proud she had been of that project. But in Ryan's version, her effort became entertainment. His laughter, once something that made her heart flutter, now made her shrink. Worse still, their son, now old enough to absorb his father's tone, began to mimic him. "Mommy doesn't work. She just watches TV," he said one afternoon, innocently parroting what he had heard. That was the day something shifted inside Amelia. She realized that staying quiet had done more damage than she could admit. Her son was beginning to think that her value could be measured by paychecks and office hours. That night, after tucking Noah into bed, she stood in front of the mirror, staring at a woman she barely recognized. She touched the fading calluses on her fingers, the ones she used to get from sketching for hours. A flood of memories came rushing back, her old dream of designing spaces that made people feel something, her sleepless nights as a student, the compliments from professors. That person still existed. She just had to find her way back to her. It was a Thursday morning when the final crack appeared. Ryan stormed into the kitchen, phone in hand, and slammed it on the counter. "The investor meeting's been moved to tonight. I need the suit I like ironed and ready by 6. Amelia blinked, unsure of what had just happened. "You said you'd be home for dinner with Noah. He was excited about showing you his school project." Ryan scoffed. "Noah will live. I've got real responsibilities, Amelia. Unlike you." Then, without skipping a beat, he added, "Honestly, if you disappeared tomorrow, I don't think anyone would notice. You're just there." The room went still. Amelia stood frozen, barely breathing, as those words settled over her like ash. It was different this time. It wasn't a joke or a careless comment. It was contempt, cold and intentional. Ryan didn't see her as a partner. Not even as a person of worth. She waited until he left before retreating to the laundry room and letting the tears come. But this time, something else stirred beneath the pain. It wasn't sadness. It was anger, quiet, steady, and determined. She couldn't live in the shadows of someone else's self-importance anymore. And even if she didn't know exactly how, she promised herself she would rise again. Not for him. Not even for revenge. But for the girl inside her who had once believed she could build anything. When Amelia finally voiced the idea of separation, Ryan didn't protest. In fact, he seemed relieved. "Fine," he said coldly, tossing a folder across the dining table. "Here's the agreement. I've already spoken to a lawyer." She opened it and saw a modest settlement, barely enough to cover a few months of rent. He kept the house, the car, the savings. Everything. "It's more than fair," he added, without even looking up. The man she had once trusted with her life now sat across from her as a stranger, one with no trace of empathy or regret. She left with 2 suitcases, her sketchbooks, and her son's school bag clutched tightly in one hand. For now, Noah would stay with Ryan until she had stability, something she couldn't offer yet. Ryan didn't argue. "You'll come crawling back in a month," he said with a smirk as she walked out. Amelia didn't respond. She just tightened her grip on her belongings and stepped into the pouring rain. Her sister, Julia, opened the door to her small apartment without hesitation, wrapping her in a silent embrace. For the first time in years, Amelia cried not from shame, but from release. Julia's apartment was cramped, barely enough for one person, let alone two. But Amelia didn't complain. She slept on the couch and spent her mornings researching job opportunities. Her resume felt ancient, outdated by a decade of unpaid labor that the world refused to value. She applied to dozens of positions, only to be met with silence or polite rejections. The few interviews she landed were brutal. One recruiter laughed when she said she'd been a stay-at-home mom. "So no real experience recently?" he asked. She bit her tongue and smiled. "I've had the hardest job there is." One evening, while cleaning out a box of old college materials, she found a worn sketchbook filled with architectural drafts and interior mock-ups. The drawings were raw, imperfect, but full of soul. She stayed up late flipping through each page, reacquainting herself with a version of Amelia she had buried long ago. Julia noticed. "Why don't you freelance?" "Just something small to start," she suggested. At first, Amelia hesitated. She didn't feel ready. But desperation has a way of unlocking dormant courage. The next morning, she posted a small ad on a local website, offering affordable interior design consultations. She had nothing to lose. Her first client was the owner of a dusty boutique who needed help redesigning the storefront to attract more foot traffic. Amelia accepted the job for a fraction of what a designer would typically charge. She threw herself into it completely, staying up late drafting layouts, sourcing budget-friendly materials, and reimagining the space. For the first time in years, her hands were stained with pencil lead, her eyes sore from detail work. But she felt alive. The boutique owner was stunned by the transformation. "It looks like a magazine cover," she said, eyes wide. "You have real talent." Word began to spread slowly. A friend of Julia's asked for help with her cafe. Then came a neighbor looking to remodel her living room. Every project was another opportunity to learn, refine, and regain her footing. Amelia documented her work meticulously, posting before and after photos on a simple website she built herself. She worked from the kitchen table, sending invoices and drawing floor plans between dishes and laundry loads. With each job, she grew bolder. Clients didn't care about her resume, they cared about results. And her work spoke louder than any gap in employment ever could. Months later, an email arrived that stopped her in her tracks. It was from a small hotel chain undergoing renovation. They had seen her cafe redesign online and wanted a consultation. Amelia stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or cry. She composed herself and scheduled the call. The meeting was nerve-wracking, but she spoke with quiet confidence, presenting her ideas with the poise of someone who had done this her whole life. They hired her for one location. She poured every ounce of effort into the project, overseeing everything from furniture placement to lighting aesthetics. The transformation caught the attention of a local travel blogger, who featured the hotel in a viral post. Suddenly, her inbox flooded with inquiries. Clients wanted to know who had done the design, where to find her, how much she charged. Amelia upgraded from freelancing to creating a business name. She printed business cards, registered her brand, and even hired a part-time assistant, a design student named Claire who reminded her of herself. There was still fear in her heart, but it no longer held her hostage. She had proven that she could rise again, not as someone's wife, but as a creator in her own right. With steady clients and growing demand, Amelia officially launched her company, Haven Spaces. She leased a small studio above a bookstore, nothing fancy, but it was hers. Claire became a full-time assistant, and together they expanded their offerings. Word-of-mouth referrals drove most of their growth, but Amelia also learned the ropes of branding and client management. Every success felt surreal, like borrowing someone else's life. But it was hers. She was building it with her own hands, one contract at a time. Even no one noticed. "Mom, are you famous now?" he asked during a weekend visit, eyes wide with pride. She laughed, holding back tears. For the first time in years, Amelia stood tall, not out of defiance, but fulfillment. Her name was listed in design directories. Clients now called her Miss Carter with professional reverence. Every space she transformed became a symbol of personal victory, each one proof that her value had never been tied to a paycheck or a man's opinion. And though Ryan was nothing but a distant shadow now, the echo of his words still lived in her memory. It no longer hurt. Instead, it reminded her of how far she had come, and how much further she was ready to go. As Haven Spaces gained traction, the tiny studio above the bookstore became increasingly cramped. Samples, materials, mood boards, and swatches were stacked in every corner. Amelia often found herself working late into the night, drafting proposals on the floor while Claire organized invoices on a stool. It wasn't sustainable. When a commercial office space in a renovated brick building became available downtown, she hesitated. Rent was 3 times what she paid. But then she remembered all the times she had been told to play it safe, to stay small, to be grateful. Not this time. The lease was signed within the week. The new space had tall windows, open beams, and a small showroom area. It wasn't just an upgrade, it was a declaration. Amelia took her parents and Noah to see it, and their reactions left her stunned. Her father, always reserved, walked through the space silently, then turned to her and said, "You built all this, Mia. With your own hands." Noah ran between the desks, proudly saying, "This is my mom's office." She smiled, knowing she was finally living a life that didn't revolve around someone else's ambition. With a bigger space came bigger clients. A tech startup asked for a full redesign of their headquarters. Then a luxury real estate agency hired Haven Spaces to stage multi-million-dollar homes. Her team expanded to include a project manager and 2 junior designers. Amelia led every creative pitch, personally overseeing the design language for each client. She no longer had to explain the gap in her resume. Her portfolio spoke louder than any credentials she once lacked. Her calendar was full. Her work was sought after. But the growth came not with noise, but grace. She didn't brag on social media. She didn't show off the numbers. She simply worked, delivered excellence, and let the results draw attention. One day, while reviewing final touches on a hotel lobby redesign, her project manager, Denise, looked up from her tablet and said, "You know, clients mention you by name now. Not the company, you." Amelia smiled. She never needed fame. She just wanted her work to mean something. And quietly, without anyone realizing it, she had built something not even Ryan could diminish. One rainy afternoon, a journalist from a regional lifestyle magazine stopped by her office. He had seen the hotel project online and wanted to interview the woman behind the transformation. Amelia was hesitant, press coverage made her uneasy. But she agreed. The interview was casual, focused on her philosophy of design, her preference for natural materials and meaningful spaces. She made no mention of her past. She didn't need to. The work stood on its own. A month later, the article appeared on the front cover, with the headline, "The Woman Who Designs with Heart." Her inbox exploded. Calls poured in from clients, suppliers, and even universities requesting guest lectures. Amelia kept her composure. Claire, however, nearly screamed when she saw the article framed at a bookstore. "You're a published designer now." Amelia laughed. Not because it was funny, but because part of her couldn't believe any of this was real. Once, she was dismissed as just a housewife. Now, she was being quoted in professional circles. Recognition had found her, not because she chased it, but because she had stayed true to her craft. It was a Tuesday morning when it happened. Amelia had arrived early to prepare for a pitch meeting and decided to grab coffee from the cafe in the building lobby. As she stepped into the elevator, someone slipped in just before the doors closed. She glanced sideways, instinctively. Her breath caught. Ryan. He didn't look like the man she remembered. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes tired, his posture no longer confident. He hadn't seen her yet. She turned slightly, unsure whether to speak. Then he looked up, and froze. Recognition dawned slowly. "Amelia?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "You work in this building?" She nodded calmly. "I do." There was a long silence. How have you been?" he asked, feigning politeness. "Busy," she replied simply. The elevator stopped on her floor. As the doors opened, she turned and added, "I have a meeting to prepare for." "Take care, Ryan." She stepped out without looking back, her heels echoing against the polished floor. For the first time, she realized she no longer felt anger. Only clarity. 3 days later, her receptionist buzzed in. "There's someone here to drop off a resume. Says he's interested in a project coordinator position. Should I forward it?" Amelia nodded absent-mindedly, eyes still on her screen. "Sure, leave it on my desk." When she glanced at the folder later, her hand froze. The name on the resume was unmistakable, Ryan T. Morris. For a moment, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She turned to the glass wall of her office, looking out over the city. He didn't know. He had submitted an application to the company she had built. The same company he once implied she was never capable of creating. A small part of her felt vindicated. Another part, surprised. Had life humbled him enough that he was now knocking on her door? She read through the resume, noting the gaps, the brief stints at fading companies. His fall had been quiet, like hers once was. But unlike her, he had burned bridges rather than build from the ashes. And now, unknowingly, he stood at the doorstep of the woman he once crushed. Amelia stared at the resume for a while before setting it aside. A flood of memories returned, nights when she cried so quietly that even the silence seemed to echo her pain, mornings when she had to smile for Noah despite feeling invisible. The same man who once laughed at her for folding laundry while he closed business deals now found himself seeking a job from her company. The irony wasn't lost on her. She wasn't interested in revenge. But neither was she inclined to let this moment pass unnoticed. She called Claire into her office. "Schedule an interview with this candidate," Amelia said, tapping the resume. "Treat it like any other." Claire nodded, unaware of the backstory. Amelia wasn't looking for an apology, at least not yet. What she wanted was something simpler, truth. She wanted to see who Ryan was without the facade. and whether he'd recognize the very empire he once claimed she'd never be able to build. Ryan walked into the conference room looking more nervous than he let on. Amelia sat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. He blinked when he saw her and gave a small, awkward smile. "I didn't know. I had no idea this was your company." Amelia leaned back in her chair. "You applied. We're conducting an interview. Let's begin." Her tone was professional, but cool. He shifted uncomfortably, pulling at his tie. He wasn't used to this kind of power dynamic, not with her. She asked him standard questions at first, noting how his answers were riddled with embellishments. "Tell me about the gaps in your employment," she asked. Ryan hesitated. "The economy hit me hard. The market changed. You know how it is." Amelia tilted her head. "Do I?" she asked calmly. He cleared his throat and tried again. "There were management disagreements, bad timing. Honestly, I just haven't had much luck." She nodded, jotting something down, but said nothing. The silence that followed unsettled him more than any accusation ever could. After 30 minutes of vague answers and half-hearted enthusiasm, Amelia closed the folder and folded her hands. "Ryan, let's not pretend," she said, her voice steady. "You know who I am. You knew the moment you stepped into this room." He exhaled sharply. "I didn't know it was your company, I swear. I only realized it during the interview." "I didn't mean to," she raised a hand to stop him. "You meant everything you said to me back then. I didn't forget. But that's not why you're here." Ryan looked away. "I've made mistakes," he admitted quietly. "I didn't treat you the way you deserved. I was arrogant." And now, he glanced at the polished table, unable to meet her gaze. "Now I've lost everything." Amelia studied him, her eyes softening for a brief moment. "You haven't lost the chance to grow," she said. "But I'm not the one who can fix that for you." She stood. "This interview is over." Ryan didn't argue. He simply nodded, then walked out with the same silence she had once left his house in. In the days that followed, Amelia thought about the encounter often. Part of her wondered if Ryan would send a message or write a letter, anything to express regret beyond self-pity. But no apology came. And perhaps that was the final truth. People rarely change unless they choose to. What he wanted wasn't forgiveness. It was rescue. And Amelia was no longer anyone's lifeboat. She had become the lighthouse, standing tall, steady, and guiding herself home through storms. Claire asked one morning, "What happened to that applicant? The one you seemed unsure about?" Amelia smiled slightly. "He wasn't the right fit," she said. And that was all she needed to say. There was no need to dwell on the past. Ryan would have to find his own path, as she had. Except hers had been built on grit, reflection, and relentless perseverance. His, it seemed, was still shaped by excuses. With the confrontation behind her, Amelia felt a strange sense of closure. Not because she had one, but because she no longer needed to. She had moved on, and life had caught up to those who once underestimated her. Her calendar remained full, her team thriving. Every room she designed now carried more than aesthetic value, it carried resilience. She started mentoring younger designers, especially women re-entering the workforce after long absences. "I was told I didn't matter," she would say. So I built something that proved otherwise. Noah, now older, had begun to ask questions about her work. He proudly told his friends his mom owned a company. Amelia looked at him one day and realized that in rebuilding her life, she had also rewritten the future for her son. He would grow up knowing that strength didn't always come with applause, that sometimes, dignity was found in the quiet act of rebuilding. And as for Amelia, she no longer played small to make anyone comfortable. She was no longer surviving. She was soaring. Just as Amelia thought her business had found its rhythm, an unexpected email arrived from an international consultancy. A resort chain in Dubai was searching for designers with a human-centered aesthetic and emotionally driven portfolio. They had seen her work featured in a recent publication and wanted a proposal for an exclusive design collaboration. Amelia reread the message, stunned. It was the kind of opportunity she'd only ever imagined. Though it scared her, the woman she had become wasn't guided by fear anymore. She accepted the challenge. She gathered her team and shared the news. Claire's jaw dropped. Dubai? That's huge. Amelia nodded with a composed smile. It is. But so was everything else we started. In the months that followed, she worked through long nights, reviewing architectural blueprints, learning regional design codes, and navigating suppliers across time zones. Her company thrived at home while she coordinated projects across borders. She was no longer just rebuilding her life. She was expanding it beyond what anyone, including herself, once thought possible. When Amelia returned from her first visit to Dubai, Noah ran into her arms at the airport with a drawing in hand. "It's your office," he grinned. On the paper, a tiny figure with brown hair stood in front of a massive glass building with international flags. Amelia knelt down, overwhelmed. "Is this how you see me?" He nodded. "You're important, Mom. Everyone listens to you." That moment meant more than any award she had received. Her son didn't just love her, he admired her. Back at home, she began including Noah in small aspects of her work. On weekends, he visited the studio, helped choose color palettes, and even gave feedback on a hotel kids' lounge concept. He proudly told his friends that his mom builds places that make people happy. Amelia quietly watched as his view of womanhood and success was rewritten through her actions. In raising herself back to her feet, she had given her son a legacy of strength. One morning, Claire rushed into the office holding her phone. "You need to see this." It was a LinkedIn post from Ryan. In it, he described the downfall of his career and how his pride had cost him everything. Toward the end, he mentioned Amelia by name. "I once mocked someone who gave everything to our family. I called her just a housewife. She built a company that's now a national name. I was wrong." Claire looked at her, stunned. "Are you okay with this?" Amelia read it twice. "It's not really an apology," she said softly. "It's a confession. And it's not for me, it's for him." She felt nothing but calm. Not because he finally acknowledged the truth, but because she no longer needed that acknowledgement. The life she'd created stood as proof of everything she had once been told she couldn't be. His words were a shadow. Her actions, the light. Weeks later, Amelia heard from an old industry contact that Ryan was struggling to find stable employment. He had been rejected from multiple firms and was nearing desperation. Claire asked if Amelia wanted to refer him somewhere. "You don't owe him anything," she said firmly. Amelia paused. "I know," she replied. "But sometimes you help people not because you owe them, but because you've grown." Without mentioning her involvement, Amelia forwarded his resume to a partner company that had a junior opening. A few weeks later, she heard he'd been hired. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a fresh start. She never told him what she'd done, and he never reached out. She didn't need gratitude. The gesture wasn't about him. It was about proving to herself that her strength hadn't turned bitter. She had risen without hardening. At the annual International Design Conference in New York, Amelia was named Professional of the Year. As she stepped onto the stage, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Bright lights poured down, but all she could see were memories: the couch at Julia's apartment, the scribbled sketches late at night, her trembling hands holding her first design contract. And now, her son, smiling proudly in the front row, eyes gleaming. She didn't speak about adversity or revenge. She simply thanked those who had been told they were too late, too soft, too invisible. "This isn't about recognition," she said. "It's about remembering who we are before the world told us who to be." The room erupted again. Backstage, she was approached by young designers wanting to know her journey. She listened to each one intently, because she knew what it meant to finally be heard. Amelia Carter wasn't just a name anymore. She was an example. In the weeks following the award ceremony, messages flooded Amelia's inbox, notes from women she had never met, each one sharing a version of the same sentiment: "Your story gave me courage." She hadn't set out to inspire anyone, only to survive. But now she understood that survival could be a beacon for others. Each day at the office was business as usual, yet everything felt different. Her voice carried more weight, not because of fame, but because it came from a place of truth. Noah, ever watchful, told his teacher that his mom was changing the world with rooms. She laughed when he said it, but the words stayed with her. It was no longer about proving her worth, it was about expanding the space for others to find theirs. Her work had become more than layouts and finishes. It was now a quiet form of rebellion against the idea that staying home meant staying small. Amelia had become what she once needed: undeniable. At a panel discussion for Rising Voices in Design, Amelia sat beside a few of the most recognized architects in the country. During a segment about career turning points, one of the moderators referenced Haven Spaces as a firm that had emerged from nowhere with remarkable vision. A woman on the panel, a former acquaintance of Ryan's, spoke without knowing the full history. "Funny thing, I once worked with her ex. He said she wouldn't last a year." The audience chuckled uncomfortably, waiting for Amelia's response. She smiled gently and said, "Life has a way of giving the loudest voices the shortest reach. I've learned that endurance speaks louder than ego ever will." The room erupted in applause. She hadn't humiliated him. She didn't need to. In that moment, her restraint was power. She had risen not by fighting old battles, but by outgrowing them completely. At a local science fair, Noah proudly unveiled a project on sustainable community spaces. He had incorporated Amelia's design principles: build for people, not just for profit. "I made it cozy and open," he explained to the judges. "Because people don't dream in tight corners." Amelia watched him from the crowd, holding back tears. He had not only inherited her eye for design but also her heart for meaning. That night, she placed his project on a shelf in her office beside her first published magazine feature. Two very different artifacts, but both symbols of the legacy she was quietly shaping. Amelia had once feared that her son would grow up seeing her as less than. Now he saw her as a creator, a leader, a builder of worlds. And in him, she saw the future, more aware, more compassionate, and unafraid to honor the strength of the women around him. One quiet Sunday, Amelia walked through the neighborhood where she used to live with Ryan. She passed by the house they once shared. The garden had changed, the mailbox was different, but the bones of the place were the same. She stopped for a moment, not to feel regret, but to acknowledge how far she'd come. Once, that house had been the limit of her world. Now, it was just a distant chapter in a much bigger book. She continued walking to the park where she used to push Noah in a stroller. She sat on a familiar bench, this time alone, a notebook resting on her lap. She began sketching ideas for a new community center she planned to sponsor, a place where women could retrain, reconnect, and restart. She smiled softly, thinking, maybe this is where it was all leading. Not to vengeance or victory, but to impact. Her pain had become a blueprint for someone else's second chance. At the opening of the center months later, Amelia stood before a crowd of women, children, and mentors. The space buzzed with hope, filled with color and light. She spoke briefly, not about her own journey, but about the women who would walk through these doors after her. This place isn't just walls and windows, she said. It's a reminder that being overlooked doesn't mean being unworthy. And that starting over doesn't mean starting from nothing. Applause echoed across the courtyard. There stood Amelia Carter, the woman once told that her absence wouldn't be noticed. The woman who had been dismissed, doubted, and discarded. And yet, she had built something enduring. Not from revenge, but from resilience. Not in someone's shadow, but in her own light. She had created a life so full, so firm, that not even the man who once made her feel invisible could ever stand above her again.